we want to make news with my next guests. UKIP's Henry Bolton and journalist and commentator Benjamin Butterworth are joining me now for a right Brexit debate, because on Tuesday, as both of you gentlemen will well know, it's the 3rd anniversary of our exit from the EU. And so I suppose the killer question for the generational debate today, you're a millennial, Ben, right?
I am.
And I think you might be a boomer, Henry, am I correct?
1963.
1963. So I'm going to put it to you, gentlemen. I'd like you to debate this against each other. Brexit has been a disaster, Henry, or a success?
Now, I'm speaking for myself now. This is my opinion. Brexit was never in itself ever going to deliver anything apart from the UK's independence in law, government and public administration. And the value of that was that actually then accountability would return to Westminster. Before Brexit, before the referendum, we had this situation where the public wasn't ever quite sure whether things they weren't happy about were the fault of Brussels or the fault of Westminster.
So it's a success of democracy, but
correct.
People aren't reaping the benefits,
well, in democratic terms, we already are. You've just been talking about Zahawi, and the fact is that now everybody is going to, not to Brussels, and nobody's blaming the European Union for everything. They're going to Westminster and asking why our politicians aren't delivering. And that's the element, the crucial element. Now, all of the other elements of it, are we going to be better off or worse off? There's a lot of disinformation out there. What I would say to people is now it is down to the British politicians and the British public to demand quality. We have a real lack of leadership.
It's been 3 years, though, Henry. Let me bring Ben here. It's been 3 years.
Yes, and we've had a massive failure of political leadership in this country. No vision, no structure, no plan, no strategy.
But I mean, so we've had, what, 3 prime ministers in that time, and the reason they haven't been able to deliver is because there never was a plan. Because you had politicians like yourself and UKIP, you had the Tories, you had this, ragtag of different people making all sorts of different claims, none of which were stitched together. And the reason that we're in a political crisis and an economic crisis, one that comparable countries are not in so deeply with their economies, the reason we're in that situation is because it was a flawed argument from the first place. I think the last time I was in here was when I was working on the Remain campaign.
The problem here, Ben, is that between the majority of people who voted Leave, were perfectly well aware of the government's position and the risk associated with leaving the European Union. David Cameron's administration sent a booklet to every household in the country, basically recommending that we voted to remain in the European Union. Now, if people didn't read that booklet, fine. But those people who did were well aware of the economic element of change. If you change something,
Henry, I'm going to get there because you can't.
Hang on. Let's bring Ben in.
You can't try and say that they were aware of the risks and then try and pretend that it's been a success. So much of what was said would go wrong.
Ben, you didn't let me finish. OK, that was all based on economic change. When you change from one thing to another, there is disruption. Disruption affects the economy. There was inevitably, and if you go back and look at my tweets, my blog posts and so on, you will see me saying that was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen. Every right-minded person who could think for themselves knew or knows that if you change from one system to another system, then you have a certain amount of disruption. The economy doesn't like it.
There we have it. No, you've admitted failure of Brexit yourself.
Let me finish.
Let's bring Ben in.
Let me finish, because my point here. My point is one more sentence, and my point will be made. That is because certain people are saying that Brexit has to be based, it's the success of it, or the judgment, on the economic outcome now. And that is not. I'm saying that the purpose of Brexit was to deliver independence in law, government and public administration so that our own politicians, accountable to the British people, could actually make decisions about how we best exploit
Henry,
opportunities for the United Kingdom.
Benjamin.
I mean, you have basically admitted it, Henry. You have said that Brexit has failed. No, and that's because Brexit you say right now that it's not delivering and that it's not working.
No, I didn't say that. The Remainers always put those sort of words in my mouth.
Well, it's what you just said.
No, I didn't say any of those words.
You're saying that it's being judged purely on economics now.
Yes, and what needs to happen?
Hang on, we've undone 40+ years of EU laws and regulations. And we've got to give it more time. We've had a pandemic, we've had a war in Ukraine, we've got inflation sky high. You've got to give it more time to see whether it is going to be a success.
I mean, as a young person, you think about the 6 years. I'm 30, so it slightly alarms me, but I have plenty of friends now that weren't even old enough to vote when that referendum happened. And their economic chances, their cost of living, so many factors, their opportunities, like when they were at university, to go to other universities around the world on exchange programs. So many of those things are diminished because of Brexit.
That's simply not true.
And you have a generation that has access to a smaller world than the one that you would have had.
Let Ben finish his point, because you make a point about, it's kind of the Brexit thing. It was boomers versus younger people. Younger people weren't as in support of it, Ben, were they?
I think it was something like 70 or 80% of people under 35 voted Remain. Meanwhile, obviously, it goes to the reverse once you get to pensioners. And the truth is that you talk about these obviously complicating factors like the pandemic and like the war in Ukraine, but the other countries in the G7 have had those same factors, and yet we're the only one who has not yet returned our economy to the size of 2019.
Right,
with the exception of Russia in the G20, we have the smallest growth projections.
Although we heard from an economist this morning, Gerard Lyons was on, saying that France and Germany are also in a bit of a pickle.
Correct.
Nothing
but
like
you say the G7. Let's talk about the European Union. OK, inflation and interest rates in the UK are right in the middle of the Eurozone. OK, you can't tell me that Brexit is the reason why inflation and interest rates in the Eurozone have gone up. Now, you talk about the reduction in students being able to, their opportunities to study abroad.
The Erasmus scheme.
The Turing scheme, British funded, British government policy, British government scheme, has now, in 2022-23, has placed nearly 39,000 British students in 150 different locations around the world, working closely with the Commonwealth Universities Association. Now, that's a fact of it. And the other thing that I would say is that you are...
Briefly, Henry.
In terms of the generation gap, I was never anti-European or anti being part of the European Union until I went to work there. Now, life brings you certain experience and you can compare things.
But Ben's saying he might not get the experience of working in Europe because of what's
he's got
happened.
that experience.
Ben,
or he's got that opportunity.
Let's bring him in.
We now don't have freedom of movement. And if you look at the kind of serious fundamental problems that our economy has, the central one is that we have a lack of workers. In this country at the moment, a fifth of people are claiming a pension. There are more people living off pensions than coming through the school system, more over 65 than under 16. We have 1.6 million vacancies in this country. Yep. That is more than the number of people seeking work. And so when we have a negative migration number from the EU, as we did in last year, what you have there is a lot of skilled workers from developed countries on our doorstep who don't want to bring their talent and their skills and their tax money to this country. And that is a consequence of Brexit. And that is a fundamental problem we have in our economy.
It's not a fundamental problem at all.
And we don't have enough workers.
You can go and work in Brussels. OK, I worked in Brussels.
I don't want to. It's quite a boring city.
Right, it is. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But the thing is, if you have a job, you can go there. And when we were still in the European Union, and I worked for the European Commission, I went to Brussels, and you know what? You've got to do all the documentation. You've got to register everything.
Point, Henry.
My point is that immigration is not something that I'm opposed to, but it has to be properly managed, and we should be selective about the people that we let in.
You can't say the immigration policy's gone well since Brexit.
Well, we desperately need more immigrants. It's what the CBI says, it's what the Office for Budget Responsibility says. And the truth is that the reason that we have the highest taxes that any person currently in work has been able to pay since the 1970s is because we don't have enough people able to pay tax. We desperately need more immigrants in this country.
I'm white flagging this now, gents. You've both had your say, and I've thoroughly enjoyed that from generation to generation. Has the gap been bridged? I think not.